The River Nile, whose waters carried the ships of kings and pharaohs, bore to an infant named Moses. The banks of the Jordan beckoned the children of Israel. Galilee witnessed the miraculous "Peace, be still." The Great Sea, the Mediterranean, served in the mission of Paul to Ephesus and Corinth. The Aegean carried John, exiled to the Isle of Patmos. From Genesis to Revelation, the waters of the Bible lands.
Shalom, hello again. Well, continuing on our Living Waters series, tonight we're going to leave Cairo and go to the Promised Land as the children of Israel did. Here on the map we have been at the pyramids in Cairo, and we're going across the Sinai. They actually went down and up and so forth, ending up at the Dead Sea, and of course crossing the Jordan River just north of the Dead Sea into Jericho. We'll begin our program this evening at that world-famous monument, the Dead Sea.
The Jordan River flows through lush wooded banks that color its glassy surface green, descending, finally, to the desolate Dead Sea. But the miry places thereof and the marshes thereof shall not be healed. They shall be given to salt.
We are here at the amazing Dead Sea, so called because nothing is alive down here but the people who come from elsewhere to swim in the waters and put the mud on themselves and use the beauty products made here. It's a rather remarkable place. A deep, deep gorge in the earth, 1,300 feet below sea level, the lowest spot on the whole earth. Some say this is where God pulled the plug out of the drain to let the flood go out, and that's why there's so many minerals. Interesting thought. We're very near the site of the biblical Sodom and Gomorrah, which would be to my left at a southern lake at the end of the sea. It seems that the Dead Sea proper is some 400 feet deep, and at the southern end on the eastern side is a plateau only 10 or 15 feet deep, which evidently was not covered with water in biblical times, and that, it is thought, was the site of Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, you know the biblical story. Lot lived down there, and God was going to eliminate those cities for their iniquity. And Abraham bargained with his God. If there be 50 tzedakah righteous men, don't destroy the city. If 40, don't destroy the city. If 30, he bargains with God, who well knows there are really no righteous men in the city. Lot alone was spared, and his family finally, in answer to Abraham's plea, except for Lot's wife, of course, who looked back and broke the will of God and was turned into a pillar of salt. So goes the story. Well, this is a place that lends itself to stories. It's unreal. It's unearth-like. The water is so extremely salty that you cannot sink in it. I'll describe more as we go along. You know, the children of Israel must have passed this saltwater place when they came in the Exodus, because they would have had to pass around the far side of the sea. I'm standing in Israel, in the West Bank, really, with my back to the sea. The hills of Edom and Moab are behind me, Edom to the south, Moab to the north, and that would be the modern land of Jordan. But when the children of Israel came out of Egypt, they would have come around the bottom of the Dead Sea and up that side, the eastern coast. Of course, they would have seen this huge sea. It looks blue and beautiful at a distance, and they evidently would have run down here thinking, oh, water to swim in, water to drink, and would have been disappointed because you won't want to drink this water. It's brackish, and you can't really swim in it. It's so very thick. If you're a great swimmer, you probably could for a few yards. You can't sink in it. Everyone floats like a cork in the water. You can lie on your back and read a book in this sea. But if the children of Israel came to the water's edge expecting to find fresh water, of course they did not. And when they were to get into the Promised Land, they were not to find it anywhere except the occasional spring and the Sea of Galilee. The rivers, Kishon and so on, were unreliable, often dry. Now, who came here? Many personalities besides Lot and his uncle Abraham. King David came here. He wasn't king yet. During King Saul's reign, David came here to flee a maddened Saul, jealous of him when the people were saying, Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed 10,000, making a great deal of mighty David's military victories. Of course, he was a champion as a boy when he defeated Goliath in the battle. He was courageous, he was creative, the people loved him, but King Saul didn't love him. He saw only a usurper to the throne, and at one point pursued him to capture him and eliminate him, and David fled here to Ein Gedi. Springs of water fall up in the mountains, if you can believe that, at a place like this in the midst of the Judean desert. And there one can take refuge, because even if they hear in Jerusalem that that's where the prisoner, where the refugee is, who wants to go through all those Judean hills, those thankless, waterless wilderness lands, to try to catch a prisoner? So David fled to this area too. John the Baptist was a personality who lived very near here, near Qumran, in a community of the Essenes, who put in their time here copying scrolls and staying away from society. They certainly weren't conformed to the world living down here. They were certainly very much separated from it. Now, the mineral wealth I have referred to, some make it one of the good worldly reasons, temporal reasons, why the Russians would want to invade Israel. And of course, we have a prophecy in Ezekiel 38 and 39 to that effect, an invasion by a mighty power to the north of Israel, in league with the Middle Eastern powers, Libya, Ethiopia, Persia, and with a territory called Gomer in Eastern Europe. We've always styled this as a Russian invasion of Israel at the moment, with Russia losing power seemingly by the day. That invasion seems less likely, the configuration of nations changing the way it is, but I've written editorials on this in our Levitt letter. We'll hold to the prophecy and look for it to happen all the same. Mineral wealth is real wealth in today's world. The Arab countries would like it too. This area is rich in potash and potassium and 100 minerals that come with this kind of situation, a rainless, baked, dry area with heavy concentration of salt water. The water out there evaporates particularly quickly with all this heat available, constantly evaporating, level falling, then more water pouring in from the north and much more evaporation. And it's this high evaporation level that automatically lets loose the minerals that are in the water and lays them around the banks. In other words, it would be difficult to extract and expensive to extract the minerals from the water, like it would be to try to get the salt out of it and make it fresh. That would be terribly expensive and difficult. But the fast evaporation leaves the heavier metals just lying on the banks, and so they can be mined very, very conveniently, and they are valuable. So with that situation, this is one of the prizes to a nation that could invade Israel. And of course, that's being tried all the time. We're in an ongoing invasion by the so-called Palestinians, and the Russian invasion is expected by prophecy students at any time. The water that's evaporating, where does it go? This is so interesting, and I've said it before in connection with the Jordan River in the north, worth repeating. Water evaporates here to heaven, of course. It is blown northward by the prevailing winds. It condenses and becomes rainwater again in the north section of the country around Mount Hermon in Lebanon, which has quite a bit of rainfall and is very, very fertile country. And the water rains down there on the mountains at Mount Hermon, rolls down the mountains to form the North Jordan River, a deep gorge that leads to the north part of the Sea of Galilee. And so this fresh water comes down into the Sea of Galilee, and then it goes down the Jordan River, the Jordan, South Jordan, leaves the southern part of the Sea of Galilee and goes down through the land. As it goes, it picks up the minerals from the desert sands, and it becomes thicker and more cloudy, and bringing the minerals down here to the Dead Sea. Finally arriving in the Dead Sea, the water dies in effect. All fish, all animal life that was around the waters, all the insects are gone, and it brings only minerals here, and then the evaporation again depositing the minerals around the shore. So in a sense, this water's in a constant cycle, and someone drew a beautiful analogy that this is Christ starting it up in heaven, who comes down from his father's house to the earth, that is, comes down to Mount Hermon. And pure, white, sinless, white as snow. Your sins will be as scarlet, but they'll be washed white as snow. And then the fresh, cold, clear water comes down Mount Hermon down to the North Jordan, and that is the Lord around Capernaum, the north part of the Sea of Galilee, his headquarters on earth. The fresh water goes into the Sea of Galilee, where there are many fish, and so we have the analogy of the dragnet, good fish and bad fish, to be separated in the day of judgment. The parables about fishing, the fishers of men lessons, and so on, the Lord walking on the sea, so many miracles associated with that beautiful freshwater human life, in effect, of the Sea of Galilee. Then Christ goes out of Galilee and comes down through the land. It's down through time, picking up the minerals from the sand. The salt of the earth, constantly bringing the minerals down, 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 down. The water finally dies here. It's totally dead. There's nothing alive in that water. And that's death, but the death in Christ promises resurrection. And so that fast evaporation and back to heaven. And so this water moves in that cycle as Jesus came from heaven to Galilee, down to Jerusalem, finally died and was raised again.
It's wonderful. I hate swimming. This is great for me. Try going around. No, it's great. Incredible. It's incredible.
Oh, it was wonderful. I loved it. I love the way you can just float and relax, and all of a sudden your feet just flop up and you turn over. But it feels good. It feels real, real good. Everybody should try it. Everybody. It's wonderful.
I just learned what you don't do in the Dead Sea. You don't go into water and stand on your head. You try to open your eyes. Amazingly painful. But I got it out pretty fast, I think. So I'm going to go back in and this time just kind of float around and enjoy.
Experience the waters and sights of the Bible lands. On this series of programs, we're introducing Zola's newest music cassette, Living Waters, for a gift of $12 or more, and a CD for a gift of $15 or more. The 12 programs comprising Living Waters are also available on 3 video cassettes. A Journey from the River Nile to the Isle of Patmos for a gift of $99 or more. A free catalog containing all of Zola's offerings is available upon request.
To continue our discussion of the waters of the Holy Land, well, the Jordan River is without peer in biblical stories, of course. Abraham would have crossed it on his sojourn from Ur of the Chaldees through Haran in Syria down to Canaan. And of course it parted for the children of Israel when they came. The Jordan, of course, is associated with the end of the Exodus when the Jewish nation, as it was, the children of Israel through the wilderness, gathered on the east bank and looked over at Jericho with its walls 11 feet thick and took the commands of the Lord seriously. They came across, as it says in Joshua 6:5, encompassed the city round about, shouted with a great shout and blew on the ram's horns, and the walls fell down. They blew trumpets at the city and shouted, and of course, as part of that story, and it's not as much brought out, the Jordan River parted. They did cross on dry land, just as they had crossed the Red Sea when they went into the wilderness out of Egypt. And so this becomes a type of the rapture of the church when they cross the sea and come into Jericho. It is at the sounds of the shouting and the trumpets that the chosen people go to their promised land, and so the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel and the sound of the trump of God. And again, the chosen people, the church, go to their promised land, heaven. Jericho becomes not really a type, but an illustration in the Bible of heaven on earth. Jericho with its oranges and grapefruits hanging off the trees and cold water up and down the gutters, and a beautiful oasis in the wilderness, and the end of the Passover journey, the end of the Exodus. That is where the Jordan River enters the biblical picture most intensively. Then the prophets had a lot to do with it. It was here Elijah crossed over to the east bank while the seminarians of Jericho watched, and that chariot came for him, and he was translated to heaven in a fiery chariot. We still sing the hymn, "Swing low, sweet chariot, coming for to carry me home," which is obviously in reference to the rapture of the church as well, the translation of the saints at the end of the church age. Elisha attended the scene and took over immediately the prophetic office of Elijah, prayed for his spirit, double his spirit, and he received it. Elisha raised an axe head to the surface of the Jordan at one time. He purified the spring in Jericho. You can remember these Bible stories from Sunday school probably. The water began to taste salty and brackish to the people at Jericho. They were probably sensitive to that, probably going down to the Dead Sea time to time to swim in the waters, the healing waters, as our people did, our pilgrims did, and people have done from time immemorial in Israel, but certainly not to drink it because it's so very salty. And the water of their own spring began to taste that way, and so they needed to have something done. They consulted Elisha, and he purified the water with prayer and with all things salt. He threw salt in the water to purify it, and that made it taste fresh, and it tastes fresh today. And anyone coming to Jericho and seeing that same faithful spring, which still puts forth water there in Jericho, is of course grateful to Elisha for what he did to purify it. The Syrian captain Naaman is connected to the Jordan. You recall he came with leprosy to the prophet and was told to go and dip himself in the Jordan 7 times. His attitude at first was, just, aren't the rivers of Syria just as wholesome? The rivers that flow through his country didn't even look to him as muddy as the Jordan. The Jordan is pretty here, but as it picks up the soil of the land, as we said, the particles, it becomes a little less clean. We're at this point in the north near the Sea of Galilee, but this was probably near where he went because it was in the north country. And he did finally, as he was told, his servants prevailed on him. That's a pretty small thing to do, to dip himself in a river 7 times, and if it would cleanse him of this leprosy, why, it certainly was worth it. And he went here and dipped himself, and it says he came out with flesh like a little child. In other words, born again. He was cleansed of his leprosy. You recall the story. And through the Old Testament, there are references of many kinds to the Jordan. Most intensively in the New Testament, of course, this is where John the Baptist held his baptism for the remission of sins, taught repentance, and was the voice crying in the wilderness. The wilderness is the Jordan where he cried. More southern than here, down near the Dead Sea again, but there people came at some pains from Jerusalem and surrounding territory, maybe all the way from Galilee, approached the river and came to John, confessing their sins and being washed in the water. It was not a new idea in Judaism. The converts to Judaism, the Gerim Hatzedikim, the righteous converts, were always baptized. They took what they called a mikvah, a ritual bath. Orthodox people still do that in Israel and in America, bathe themselves each Sabbath and more often. And it was not new to them to be dipped in the water. It was new to them to see that as purification from their sins, and in particular, when Messiah himself came to the river, to see that as an act of obedience to God. Now, Jesus came to this river in Luke 3:21. He is baptized. He approaches John, and the Holy Spirit comes, and I don't have to explain that scene. This is the river, this is the water. And through then the ages, Christians have come here. From the times of the temple, from the dispersion times, from the even Muslim times, Crusader times, and so on. Christians came. The Crusader soldiers rode in. They had wars, they had difficulty, and they came to the river and were washed. And on through to our own time, our pilgrims all come, and you've seen it on the program, are baptized in this river. Too many baptisms never hurt anyone, and though many of them have been baptized before, they go in the water where the king himself went. And the Jordan will still play a role in prophecy, as do all the waters of the Holy Land. To assault this country from the east or from the north, you have to cross this river. We did a program in our series of the end of the age where We showed that a certain bridge in Galilee that crossed the Jordan would be critical to any army approaching from the north, and wondered if the force of the King of the East, the 200,000 man army, a 200 million man army, usually thought of as a Chinese army, the yellow peril at last, would come to the Valley of Armageddon from the northeastern side. If so, they have to cross the Jordan. It's not the water. As you can see, it's a small river. It's the gorge in the land that the river makes. It's much, much lower than the rest of the terrain, and if you're moving heavy vehicles, tanks and trucks and personnel carriers and so forth, you have to make quite a plan, and there's going to be quite a stalling of the whole mobilization when you come to the river. So the Jordan may in the end protect and delay the Battle of Armageddon until the return of the Lord, who said, "If I had not come then, there would be no flesh saved." A peaceful and a quiet river which has seen more of biblical history than any body of water except those it feeds. When the Hebrew nation crossed the Jordan, something brand new happened to them. We had a new spiritual concept, a believing nation. How good of believers they were? Well, at least they saw the miracle of the Lord. They saw the walls of Jericho fall down. They were more believing, let's say, than the nation that had left Egypt and perished out in the wilderness in 40 years wandering. They were not really a nation. They simply were the descendants of the patriarchs who were slaves all that time. I mean, not a nation in the sense of a cohesive people with a government. Since they were slaves, they were prevented from being a real nation. Now we have something like a believing nation in its own land. This is fulfilled in the New Testament conception of a nation of priests. 1 Peter 2:9 gives the thought, "But ye are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, and holy nation." This is about the church. This is about the people that believe in the Jewish Messiah. "A peculiar people, that you should show forth the praises of him who hath called you out of darkness into his marvelous light, which in times past were not a people, but are now the people of God." In other words, the Christian believers become a new chosen people, typical of which was the nation of Israel when it began. It says, "which have not obtained mercy, but now have obtained mercy." God had taken ordinary unbelievers and made of them a nation of priests. With the Israelites, he had taken of ordinary slaves in an idolatrous land. Their generation came into Israel and became the first believing nation. And of course, we know in the history of Israel they were dispersed for a long time, since the first century until 1948 AD. But in this generation, we saw the final nation, the final believing nation established. In other words, Israel's reestablished, and it will be the Israel to which the Lord will return and the kingdom will obtain for 1,000 years. In other words, the small Israel we see struggling for existence, fighting and arguing and all of the strife and all of the poverty and so on, will become the head of the nations. This very one, it's not to be torn down and started up again, but as the book of Amos says, "When I place my people in their own land, I shall not remove them again." So this is the one we're going to see in the kingdom, except it will be peopled then with the returned believers, and it will be guided by the king himself. It's what makes the believing nation such is it has an invisible God. not like the Roman Empire where issues of gods came forth statuary, produced at foundries and spread out in the empire. Those were visible gods. But the Hebrews had the one invisible God. Out in the wilderness, they had to see him as the pillar of fire or the cloud. Like the disciples in the boat, when the Lord sent them on the Sea of Galilee without him, they had to believe in an invisible God who they could call on in time of storms or stress. And the Christians become the nation with an invisible God before the kingdom. That's what we are now. And we have to negotiate this world and its storms, not without a God, but an invisible God to whom we can call for intercession when we need it. And so the story of the gospel. Well, the Egyptians and modern unbelievers always had visible gods. The modern unbeliever believes in gods of stone, giant buildings, gods of money, pictures of presidents on pieces of paper that say that governments will redeem it with gold and so forth. That becomes a god, and we sure see plenty of it. Well, Israel and the Christian kingdom, in their turns in history, Israel when it crossed the Jordan, the Christian kingdom when the Lord finally comes, is the first and the last nation of believers, the Alpha and the Omega. Our offer on tonight's show is music. You've been hearing a little of the Living Waters music. As the series goes on, you'll hear it right along. You can have it on our tape and now a CD instead of a record, okay? More people are getting CDs. The tape is $12, please. Costs have gone up. Please bear with us. $12 for the tape, $15 for the CD if you have a CD player. If you have a CD player, we have produced all of our music called The Works, all of Zola's songs. This doesn't include the new one, The Living Waters. You'll need both of those together if you want all the music, but all the music of the 80s is on The Works. And you get a lyrics book with it, $49, okay? The complete lyrics of all the albums and all the music, $49, please. Our catalog tells all the offers. It's free. Send for it anytime. Folks, what we need really is funds. This is not a store. To make location programs like this, we need your help. We need your gifts. Send for the music. Send a gift, whatever. We can serve you now by phone. The number's on your screen. Just call us or write to us at our post office box. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem.